Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance.
Hey, Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Doing well. Beautiful summer day here in Michigan.
Doesn't get much nicer than what we've got this morning.
Heading into a holiday weekend. I'm sure you're excited about all your visitors coming up to see you this weekend.
Oh yeah. All the kids, all the siblings. We should make it through the 4th with all our fingers intact, hopefully, but full house nonetheless.
Speaking of kids coming up to visit you, Dave, today's episode is actually on becoming an empty nester and how that impacts your retirement plan. And so what better expert than Mr. Shotwell himself telling us a little bit about his experience as an empty nester and how that's impacted things. So your kids have been out for quite some time now, right?
Well, yeah. Let's see. I would count us as empty nesters since the end of COVID. Yeah, Ben was in school during COVID and had to come home during that 2020, 2021 school year. And other than that, we have pretty much been empty nesters with the occasional visits.
So it's an interesting dynamic, especially as it relates to retirement planning, because it's kind of, when you have your kids and they're in the house and, we can count the college years because, you're usually supporting them through college at least, and sometimes much longer, I realize. But there's usually this gap between I'm not supporting the kids fully. We'll talk a little bit about what that might mean for different people, because it's something that impacts things as well. But they're not living with me and I'm not retired yet. And so I have this disposable income that maybe I hadn't had before leading up into retirement. And that can be anywhere a lot of this depends on how young you have kids. But sometimes it can be, 10, 15 years. Sometimes it's 5 years. But there usually is this kind of period for our clients who have kids where they're not necessarily living with them, you're not supporting them, and so you have this extra disposable income. Right?
And for a lot of our clients, it's like one of the bigger milestones between starting to get serious about retirement planning, and or you reach a certain, it's a little different for everybody, but you reach a little plateau maybe in your career, or maybe a little better known arc as far as how your career is going to play out. Like a lot of that is behind you.
Sure.
And then the kids leaving home is the big thing that changes between kind of like a mature career and retirement.
Yeah, and it's this interesting time, from a psychological standpoint of what is this next phase of my life? Because a lot of times before it was all about what are the kids doing? Where do the kids need to be? Who needs to get fed? Who needs this? Who needs that? And now it's all kind of more self-reflection on you and your spouse, right?
Right. And obviously there's an emotional component to that, which, is hard to deny, but the financial implications, and beyond just kids are expensive, but then you're more independent. The obvious thing that comes to mind, my wife and I are looking around at where we want to land living wise. We don't have to worry about school districts, and it's about guest bedrooms, not total living space so much. It's not everybody. We want the kids to have their own room. It's they're probably not going to be at the house at the same time together very often, right?
Right.
You start weighing those things, and you've got not just financial independence for yourself, but also some more flexibility.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I have a personal rule that my wife disagrees with, but that is, let's make the guest room comfortable enough for a night or two, but nobody's going to want to stay there.
You don't want to make it too comfortable, right? Yeah. So that room that and you have kind of the same dynamics we do, where you've got a son and a daughter with a couple years in between them. Well, if you make them all share a room, they're probably not going to stay, past Thanksgiving, right? Things that come to mind for a lot of people is all of a sudden, a lot of fixed overhead cost goes away. Groceries become less expensive. Going out to eat becomes less expensive, just because you've got one less place at the table to worry about, or two, depending on what you're looking at. And also, a lot of folks end up deferring in a way their own financial trajectory towards retirement to
Mm-hmm.
accommodate college, to accommodate, it starts with buying cribs and daycare, and it never
Right.
really stops.
No.
One thing to keep in mind on the positive side is that if you've been waiting to increase your 401k contributions, your
Right.
403b contributions, that's one possibility. Thinking about your mortgage differently and just general cash flow, it's a good time to review your budget, sit down, figure out like what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
But also too, if you've been diligently saving and taking care of yourselves, if you've been fortunate enough to be able to do all the right things, I guess, as
Yeah.
financial
Right.
planners, we would put it, staying on track with your own retirement contributions. Now is also a time, to evaluate what you've saved and where that puts you during retirement, because you may not need to increase your retirement savings too. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to just carte blanche say, oh yeah, now's the time to go from, 12% to 18% because you've got that
Right.
extra. So it's about balance, right? Too, because also you don't want to just start spending more money because you have it,
Yeah.
because the other, then you have the opposite problem where maybe you're in your mid 50s, you start spending more because kids are gone. Now it's going to be then hard to reverse that trend
For sure.
when you do reach retirement. And so now you need more in retirement and in
Mm-hmm.
retirement savings to fund it.
It's an interesting dynamic because you got a lot of things at play, right? And here's where it gets challenging. The default for most of our clients who are savers are like, well, I'll just throw
Well,
all this into my 401k
right,
and right, like
right,
have a bigger
right.
401k, even though I don't really plan on
Yeah,
retiring anytime soon.
yeah,
And when you could, there's a lot of utility for using that money when you're younger, healthier, can do things, right? But
yeah.
also, or help kids even, right? Or continuing to help kids to some degree. And then the flip side of
Hmm.
that is for people who have put off saving for retirement because, of spending for the kids, like that's the perfect time to be able to
Yeah.
increase those things. But they're, maybe more predispositioned to be like, hey, I've got all this extra money now. I don't have kids around, so I can spend it and go buy the things or do
Yeah.
the things and maybe not. But I love your point about like it's a great time to just assess where you're at and make intentional
Hmm.
plans about how you're going to use that money, because you're right, whether you save it or spend it is going to have an impact on your plan, and you're going to want to make sure that you know what that impact is and where you're going to end up. And if you haven't really done that and gone through that process, it's a really great time to think about what that means and what that looks like.
One thing I heard this on another podcast, a podcast meant for advisors put on by Avantis Funds, that it was a retirement expert, and I wish I'd written down the source, but he was talking about how if the statistics that we heard took into account the fact that people do tend to ramp up their retirement savings
Yeah.
after the kids leave home, the like dire statistics we hear about retirement wouldn't be quite as dire, because they'll like say, well, the average 35-year-old doesn't have, has X in their
Right.
401k, but they're not accounting for the like huge bump that a lot of people make, in their like late 50s, between making more money and not having to pay for the kids. I thought that was really interesting, and I don't think the details are here or there, but the general gist of it is that if you feel like you're behind and you're 45 and the kids are out of the house in another 4 or 5 years, don't despair, I guess is part
Yeah.
of the message.
And that's one of those conversations I have with a lot of our younger clients too, where it's like, okay, you're saving 10% into your 401k. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
ideally it'd be great if you were at 15 or 20%, but you also have kids, right? And so at some point you're going to
Right.
have that extra money to be able to save. So don't freak out about where you're at right now in comparison to other people. Just
Yeah.
worry about like this too shall pass. Like you'll get through
Yeah.
this. You'll
Yeah.
have
Do what you
extra money.
can,
You
but
can
yeah.
and you'll end up saving, because I know you're a saver if you're saving 10% with kids, because that's not an easy
Yeah, that's pretty
challenge to do.
ambitious. Right.
Right. So
Right.
like, I know that
Right.
when you get to that point, you're going to be, in those 15 to 20% ranges and making up some of those contributions. And I don't know if they plan this out or not, but there is catch up contribution starting at age 50. So you have more capacity as well. So the timing of that works out,
Did
right?
Congress get something right there, like
Yeah.
lining those
Right.
things up? So just keep all that in mind. Sit down, run the numbers, think it through, talk to a financial planning professional, talk to your, spouses need to be on the same page on this too, and do the math before you blindly increase your spending or blindly increase your savings.
Well, I think another thing that we need to talk about too is this dynamic between, empty nesters versus off the payroll. And
Yeah.
maybe your kids don't live in the house anymore, but maybe that's
Yeah.
because you're paying for them to not live in the house. And so what impact does that have on your
Right.
plan? Right. And what
Right.
impact does that have on them?
No judgment, as long as you're intentional about it. If it's important to you to, make sure your kids have certain things as they're getting launched. I don't want to sound too down on that, but we've also seen where it puts parents in a situation where they're continuing to defer their
Right.
own retirement safety and their own ability to do what they want to do. Guilty admission, my kids are still on my cell phone contract.
Yeah.
But they also like we've worked that out. And it's
Yeah.
basically just because the marginal cost of them going and getting a new one right now versus
Right.
the contract that Verizon would love for me to give up, it doesn't make sense. So instead they pay me to keep them on my contract,
Yeah.
more or less.
Okay.
That will probably change soon. We're getting to the point where it's time, regardless of the difference in cost. That's just one small example, but we've seen it with clients where if you're not careful, it just goes on and on.
Oh
So
yeah.
the big thing is to set those expectations with your kids. Earlier the better. Like I think a good marker maybe is when insurance has to change. We just went through that with our son, where he reached the age where he's no longer eligible for our plan.
Health insurance, I assume you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about health insurance.
insurance
Yeah,
is
sorry,
age
should be more
26. Yeah. Yeah.
specific.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah. And so it wasn't like, hey, right away, you're out of college, you're on your own. It was, hey, we're going to like ease into this and we're not going to leave you in the lurch, but we're also, that's an obvious one because there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah.
Blue
Right.
Cross wasn't going to let us say, hey, we want to keep them on the policy. I guess we could have continued to pay, right?
Sure. Sure.
So, just I guess the big thing is making sure everybody's on the same page. Talk with your kids. It's healthy to talk to your kids about money anyway. So go do it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And we have a similar thing. My daughter's 20 now, and it's like a slow progression of, okay, when you turned 18, then we put your car in your name, and guess who gets to pay the registration now, right? Like it's just a small thing.
Right.
It's $100 once a year.
Right.
We're still paying the car insurance while she's going to school and all that stuff, but it's
Yep.
just this small progression of those life skill type things and getting more responsibility and figuring that stuff out. And I think that's helpful for a lot of people. One thing I want to touch on though, as well, it kind of goes back to the point of making a plan. And as you progress and checking your retirement plan, because there's a lot of people that want to do things for their kids, and we just urge them to do them responsibly and know how that impacts their overall plan. But I've heard a lot of things, especially in the financial news, about wanting to help kids buy houses now because they're so expensive, so much more expensive compared to the incomes, and kind of helping them get started and launched in that way.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different things that people want to do for their kids. And I kind of view our job as to help them to find a way to say yes if it's important to them.
Right? Well, right. Yeah. Yeah. First decide if it's important to you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And then figure out what the implications are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have I ever told you about my deal with my mom when I was first married and had little kids? Oh, my mom's deal was she wanted to help me with certain things. Like I remember the first year we were married, I don't think I had two nickels to rub together, and she wanted my wife to have a sewing machine for her birthday because she knew she wanted one. But it was about $150, I think. Yeah. And my mom she called me up like a week before Amy's birthday and said, this is on hold at Sears, at the local mall. Just go pick it up. And I was like, well, I don't want to owe you money for this. And she said, no, that's okay. I'm keeping track. Every $100 is one day out of the nursing home when the time comes. And I'll bet you somewhere she has that. I'm gonna see her this weekend and ask her if she's got that ledger.
That's fantastic.
But yeah. So which is funny because my mom is not usually that serious about money.
Yeah, you ask her, and she's like, "Oh, looks like I'm moving in tomorrow, Dave."
I also need to remind her not to watch this episode, but she'll be mortified that I brought
That's
it
too
up.
funny.
So the bottom line there is, we knew the terms, right? And someday
Yeah,
that bill will come due. And but it did also make sure that I wasn't going to just assume that every holiday there was going to be something waiting for me to pick up at the mall to
right.
make good on. Talk to your kids about it. Have a defined
Yeah,
outcome there.
there's definitely this balance between helping them out but not gifting them too much where they don't have to take
Yeah,
the responsibility,
yeah,
right? And trying, and that's
yeah,
where talking to them and setting some boundaries and setting some lines, it makes
yeah,
perfect sense
yeah,
because
yeah.
ultimately you want them to grow and be able to, and they want to
Right,
grow and be able to do it on their own, right? Nobody
right,
wants to
right.
be a
Yeah,
warden of the
find
state,
that
if you will.
find that balance between
Yeah,
sharing your wealth, not making them go through it quite as tough as you did, and
right. Yeah, but
still
still.
learning the benefits of sitting on milk crates if they have to. Other thoughts are like these are financial, but not directly financial. Is Amy and I have tried to use the time, if you will, to try
Mm.
different things. The
Hmm.
not being tied to a school district, not being tied to a play that allowed us this winter to take an extended break down south to try out being snowbirds for a little
Yeah.
bit,
Hmm.
and hard to do that with the kids in the house, but it was kind of like a little mini let's see what this would be like in retirement. Now neither of us are retiring anytime soon. I don't want to alarm any clients out there, but it's taking advantage of that flexibility. Yeah,
I love that idea of, and we've talked about it on this show before, of just trying things out. Everybody, has this idea of what people should do in retirement, right?
yeah.
And, they make big plans on that. We've talked about like getting an RV and traveling the world only to find out that you hate being in an RV
Yeah,
five days
yeah,
later,
every time you
right?
get gas you have a nervous breakdown. Yeah.
Right. Or like
um
moving to Florida or buying a house and deciding you don't really
yes.
like it in Florida, right? Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
trying out those things, especially while you're working, if you have the ability to with a flexible schedule and no kids at home, I think is super important and a great way to
yeah.
kind of use that empty nester time to figure some things
Hmm.
out. Another thing that happens, and one of the reasons why we keep coming back to, hey, you should really update your financial plan as things change because, you might have the perfect idea of right now of what you want retirement to look like. And that can all
Yeah.
change in a flash because, as we've talked about several times on this show, we're very bad at predicting our own future or what we're going to want in the future, right? We are much better short-term thinkers than long-term thinkers. But one of the things that ultimately pops up for empty nesters a lot of the time too is all of a sudden now you're an empty nester, but your kids have kids and you're a grandparent for the first time.
Guilty.
And
Yeah.
that and that can definitely impact spending and the decisions that you make too, right?
Yep. Where you want to be relative to your kids when all of a sudden
Mm,
grandkids are in the picture, that can lead to some new decision making. But then again, like having the flexibility to try things out too comes into play.
sure.
Like, do we
Yeah.
want to, you know, try being closer? I guess the caution I would throw there, and we've both seen clients make this mistake, is just remember your kids' lives are dynamic too, both what's in their
Hmm.
control and not in their control. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had clients move to be near the kids only to have the kids have to move,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
so be cautious with that.
Mm-hmm. Conversations solve a lot of things because we've also, your kids might not want you
Oh,
next door, right? Like
yeah.
they might.
Right. Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
dynamics to figure out there as well.
Yeah.
But it's definitely
Yeah.
that next progression of like you have this time when you're an empty nester and the kids are out doing their own thing. And then all of a sudden they start having kids and that whole dynamic changes as far as your plan and where you want to be and the money you're spending,
Yeah.
to be honest with
Yeah.
you,
I
right? Like,
opened a 529 plan for my granddaughter last week. I think we'll maybe do a conversation on that one of these days.
yeah, I think that's
But
one of the next ones on the docket is talking about funding your grandchildren's education and how to pay attention to that and the dynamics of that. So look forward to that one coming up. But just another one of those things to think about, to think through as you're going through this kind of empty nester time. And it all really kind of rolls up and back to making sure that you know where your plan is and how these decisions are going to impact it. And, we always say that we come up with great plans for people, but none of it actually ever comes true. And that's just because your life's going to change and things are going to change. And that's why we're here, is to help you change those things in your plan so that you can make sure that you're still moving forward in the direction that you want to and everything is still aligning for that.
Well said as always, Nick.
With that, Dave, it has been a pleasure. If our listeners have any questions and would like to reach out, we'd love to hear you. Send us an email to info@srbadvisors.com. And if you're curious about some changes to your situation now that you're an empty nester, be sure to check out our website and book a time to talk with one of us and see how we might be able to help. With that, thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.
This is a Zedia Media production.